perhaps thundery downpours, although a lot of those showers likely to move up towards the northwest, with Wrexham and Flintshire better placed to avoid them. Parts of the Midlands today likely to have persistent showers during the middle of the afternoon, although they will gradually be moving away to the east, brighter skies later on. And those showers transferring their way then to western parts of East Anglia. So although Norwich and parts of Suffolk do look dry, some wet weather expected elsewhere across the region. For the southern counties of England, a changeable afternoon, bright at times, a scattering of showers here and there, passing through a southwesterly wind. So heading into the evening then, many eastern areas becoming dry, clear spells, blustery showers continuing elsewhere, and that's how that very mixed weather picture is shaping up today.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
On Mark Dolan Tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me every Friday, Saturday and Sunday for big guests, big opinions and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
Good afternoon and welcome to GB News. You're watching Common Sense Crusade with me, the Reverend Calvin Robinson, on your TV, radio and online. This show is all about championing common sense, and today we will be discussing same-sex marriage, immigration and COP27. First, here's a check of the latest news headlines.
Good afternoon, it's 2 o'clock, the top story. The leader of the Liberal Democrats has branded the Conservative Party incompetent and morally bankrupt. In a speech to the party conference, Ed Davey blamed the UK's rising cost of living on Russia's war in Ukraine, but he also criticised the government's attempts to tackle the issue. He called for a stronger windfall tax, higher taxes on banks, and said it was time for a general election.
After inflicting so much chaos, the Conservatives want the rest of us to pay to clear up their mess. They're already talking about more unfair tax rises, more cuts to pensions and benefits, more cuts to schools, the police, even our NHS. All to fill the hole they themselves created. It's like they robbed our bank and now they're asking us for a loan to buy their getaway car. Well, we say no. Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt, instead of inflicting even more pain on struggling families and pensioners, it's time to start helping. Put a proper windfall tax on the blood oil profits of the fossil fuel giants. Reverse your tax cuts for the big banks. They are unfair and unnecessary, and use those extra billions to give people real help with energy bills, to protect pensions and benefits from inflation, to safeguard schools, hospitals and councils from cuts, and to help homeowners struggling to pay that Conservative property penalty.
So, Davey, well, the UK's Alok Sharma has handed over to COP27 in Egypt with an opening speech urging world leaders to take concrete steps and fast to tackle global warming, saying inaction will lead to climate catastrophe. The president of the COP26 summit, which was hosted last year in Glasgow, admitted that despite progress in the last year, the world is not on track to keep global temperatures below 1.5 degrees.
How many more wake-up calls do world leaders actually need? A third of Pakistan underwater, the worst flooding in Nigeria in a decade. This year, the worst drought in 500 years in Europe, in 1,000 years in the US, and the worst on record in China.
Well, the Prime Minister will make a pledge to make the UK a clean energy superpower when he addresses the COP27 summit tomorrow, urging all countries to move away from fossil fuels. He's going to warn that tackling global warming is fundamental to future prosperity and security. Mr Sunak will also argue that the shock in the oil and gas markets caused by Russia's invasion of Ukraine highlights the need to move to cheaper and cleaner sources of energy. Now, nurses across the UK have for the first time voted in favour of national strike action in a dispute over pay. More than 300,000 members of the Royal College of Nursing were balloted, the biggest ever in the union's 106-year history. The walkouts are set to take place within a few weeks, possibly before Christmas. It's likely patients will face disruption to operations and appointments. Tanzania's state media says at least 3 people have been killed after a passenger plane crashed into Lake Victoria. Rescue boats, emergency workers and bystanders have been helping to pull passengers to safety from the water. 15 have been rescued so far. Precision Air is Tanzania's largest privately owned airline. Local media saying the plane was trying to land at the city of Bukoba in stormy weather. The country's president has appealed for calm as the rescue operation continues. Here, National Highways has secured a High Court order to ban Just Stop oil protesters from disrupting traffic on the M25. The order states that anyone entering the motorway, attaching themselves to any object or structure on it, or assisting others can be held in contempt of court. Protesters could face imprisonment, an unlimited fine, and the seizure of assets. Tickets for Glastonbury 2023 went on sale today and sold out within an hour. The site initially experienced a few technical issues, with the site continually crashing under the weight of demand. Tickets for the event usually sell at about £350 each. The Prime Minister's announced an extra bank holiday to mark the King's coronation next year. The holiday will take place on Monday the 8th of May, after His Majesty's coronation on the Saturday. Rishi Sunak says he looks forward to seeing people come together and celebrate and pay tribute to King Charles III. You with GB News, more news as it happens. I'm back in an hour.
This is GB News. We'll be bringing you more news as it happens. Welcome to Common Sense Crusade with me, Calvin Robinson, and here's what's coming up this afternoon. The Bishop of Oxford has become the first serving senior bishop in the Church of England to publicly call for the Church to bless and conduct same-sex marriages. Is this progressive thinking or an unwarranted deviation from tradition? And later, religion has been a prominent topic in debates about immigration and ethnic diversity over the past 15 years. This has led to concern about immigration's consequences for national cultures and to seemingly contradictory associations between Christianity and attitudes towards immigration. We will debate this later. It is widely reported that Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt are set to announce £50 billion worth of tax rises and spending cuts in their upcoming autumn statement. Is this a breath of fresh air or just more money being thrown at the problem without dealing with inflation? And of course, you can join in any of our discussions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet @gbnews. Deus Vult. On Friday, the Right Reverend Dr. Stephen Croft, Bishop of Oxford, published a 52-page essay calling for same-sex weddings to be allowed in the Church of England within their own churches. Next to come out were the Bishops of Worcester, Bishop of Dudley, Bishop of Europe, the former Bishop of Reading, Bishop of Buckingham, Bishop of Dorchester, the former Bishop of Repton, Bishop of Grantham, Bishop of Worcester, former Bishop of Croydon, the former Bishop of Portsmouth, and on. But this is not an issue of equality or human rights. Civil partnerships and civil marriages are an option for everyone outside of the church. This is a matter of faith. Christians who are not called to marriage are called to a life of celibacy. The Bible is very clear on this matter. Sex is for people who are married, and marriage is between one man and one woman. These views might seem outdated or old-fashioned or even otherworldly by today's standards, but they are the official teachings of the church. Why then are these progressive liberal bishops attempting to change Christian doctrine? To be more inclusive? To catch up to the 21st century? Are they wrong to be considering this? In my opinion, it's not their job. Their job is to defend the faith. It's not our place to meet secular society where it is. We are called to be in the world, but not of the world. It is our job to shine a light on the ever-darkening world around us, to offer hope by preaching the gospel, to tell people that it's okay because Christ died for our sins so that we may receive everlasting life in him. All we have to do is repent and find faith in the Lord. I don't think it's our job to be moulding the church to mirror what we see around us. Of course, we should listen to marginalised communities. There's no harm in listening to opposing viewpoints. The issue is when we take these perspectives as gospel, so to speak, and put them over and above the gospel. Listen, yes, and respond in a compassionate manner. I have no doubt there's been pain and a lack of understanding, but we now live in a society where LGBTQ++ people are not marginalised. Pride Month became Pride season, and rainbow flags adorn more public buildings than the flag of the nation. Time has moved on, and so must the conversation. We must encourage people to break free from their victimhood mentality, which will only hold them back, and to acknowledge the progress that has been made, whilst we acknowledge that there is work yet to be done. In this conversation, there is also a patronising assumption that all LGBTQ++ people share one voice, one narrative, and that particular voice and narrative must be listened to, almost as if their lived experience should outweigh reason, tradition, and scripture. The idea that all gay, lesbian, or bisexual people are part of one homogenous group, that must be insulting. They can't all agree, surely. There's just as much diversity within that community as within any other. I experienced the same issue myself with my race. Metropolitan liberal elite types say we need to listen more to the lived experience of BAME or UKME people, but then disregard my voice because it doesn't fit the narrative. They assume we're all of one groupthink mentality, and when you demonstrate otherwise, they cast you aside because it breaks down their logic. Everyone should be treated with respect and dignity, but we cannot and we must not alter Christian doctrine. That undermines the very purpose of the teachings, and it's a slippery slope to apostasy and irrelevance. As I see it, there can be no compromise on this matter. The church is the bride to the groom of Christ. Christ does not marry himself, he marries himself to us. If we choose to marry ourselves to ourselves, we're pushing out Christ. To me, a marriage needs a bride and a groom. Anything else is not holy matrimony. Let us return to Christ. The Bishop of Oxford, the Right Reverend Dr. Stephen Croft, has become the first serving senior bishop in the Church of England to publicly call for the Church to bless and conduct same-sex marriages. Croft said he previously held an orthodox Christian view on marriage, but had slowly but surely experienced a change of heart and mind. He was then joined by the bishops of Worcester, Dudley, who in a joint letter said the time had come for the Church to honour and celebrate same-sex relations. So is it time for the Christian teaching on homosexuality to change? Is that possible? Joining me now is Right Reverend Humphrey Southern, Honorary Assistant Bishop of Oxford and Principal of Ripon College, Cuddesdon. First of all, my Lord, thank you very much for joining me. I genuinely appreciate this. We invited a number of bishops and none of them were willing to come on and proclaim the gospel to the audience or even to defend their position, so I really do appreciate you coming on. Can you start by please letting us know what is the Church's current teaching on this issue?
Can I start by asking, thank you very much for having me, but I'd much rather not be my lord. I'd much rather be Humphrey, which is the name I was given at the font. Thank you. The teaching, the traditional teaching of the Church has been, as you've outlined it. The Church has also always been called, and this is here I want to disagree slightly with what you said, always been called to engage with that which is not the Church. It's always been there to be involved in mission which must be a two-way street. There must be a genuine conversation. The kind of mission which is merely we know and you don't is arrogance and power play and not at its best what the Church is called to. So on this matter, as on others, the Church has engaged with, has listened to, has learned from the experience of people in the wider world. And this, as the Bishop of Oxford has encouraged us to think, is a legitimate way of doing our theology, a legitimate way of trying to speculate and discover what may be the will of God in changing circumstances and in a changing world. So I think that to see this as part of a developing engagement and conversation is an entirely reasonable way of going about it and doing our theology.
I'm with you on a number of points. I absolutely agree. Of course, the Church should be engaging with all different kinds of communities, but shouldn't be adopting teaching based on that. And, you know, it's not arrogance to say, we know, you don't. That's not the message of the Bible, is it? The message is that we're all saved, and it's about us bringing the gospel to people, not necessarily changing our lifestyles to match other people's lifestyles. Is that not the case? But to push further on this, you know, the Bishop of Oxford has called to change doctrine. He admitted that it is doctrine, and he's asked to change church teaching on this matter. Do you support the Bishop of Oxford's call to change our teaching?
I think it's really important to listen to the whole of what the Bishop of Oxford has said. The Bishop of Oxford has asked for us to enable this to happen, to enable the blessing of same-sex unions and to enable the marriage of same-sex people. He's also equally and just as significantly, I think, acknowledged that this will not be the way for all and that there needs to be a way in which the Church can manage and live with a diversity of practice. I think it's very interesting that in so much of the summary of his long and thoughtful essay, so little attention has been given to that very significant part of it. That actually, as has happened in the case of other contentious issues, where the Church has learnt from the society which it is here to serve and to engage with, like, for instance, the role and authority of women, there has been provision made both for those who want to move in a more creative and you might say liberal way, and space made for those who are more cautious and indeed more traditional. And so Bishop Stephen has been very careful to say that we need to respect both. It's not just about changing doctrine and forcing people to put up.
I acknowledge that. I did read the entire report, and I did also put a long, lengthy response to it. So I'm not cherry-picking parts of the report. I did consider it all. But I do want to put the question to you, because this is more than just marriage, of course, because marriage is for several purposes. The Church has always taught that sex should only be taking place within a marriage and has two purposes, for procreation and for bringing together husband and wife. And gay sex does not fulfill those purposes. So how can that be accepted? Or is that not part of this?
It's part of the traditional teaching of the Church that marriage is there to build up society, actually, and that's very clear from the preface to the marriage service in both the Book of Common Prayer.
But you're not denying those 2 points that I put forward that are in the Catechism, are you?
No, but I'm looking at the liturgy, and the Church of England, its doctrine is held by the liturgy, and the liturgy is quite clear that there are several purposes for marriage, which include the two that you mentioned and others. Significant amongst which is building up the fabric of society, and I think that I think that it is quite important to look at the whole of that.
Okay. Well, I don't have it all day, but I do appreciate you coming on, and I wish we could spend more time talking. But Humphrey, thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Now let's turn to my panel to debate whether it's time for the Christian teaching on homosexuality to change. Joining me is Reverend Michael Corran, Anglican priest and author, and Gavin Ashenden, the former chaplain to Her Majesty the Queen Elizabeth II. I'll start with you, Father Gavin. Do you think it is only a matter of time before the Church of England allows gay marriages to be conducted in churches? And if so, what would that mean for the Anglican communion?
Oh yes, it's been the plan for quite a long time. They're only going through the motions of consulting, and so there's no doubt at all that that's exactly where they'll end up. The difficulty I had with Bishop Southam was that it sounds very laudable to want to consult society to see what society wants, but if you're a state church in which your main aim is to provide a kind of comfort blanket spirituality, well, of course you would do that. But the problem with our society is that it's profoundly flawed. We're in the middle of a period of serious sex addiction. We've elevated romanticism and erotic experience to the form of demigods. And the outcome of this has been really very poor indeed. People's psychological health, the stability of families, the well-being of children have taken hits in such a serious way that it really ought to give us time to stop. So the answer is the project is very badly flawed.
We'll pause there. And Father Michael, if you could respond to that.
Yeah, by the way, if you want to call me your lordship, you can. I'm fine with that.
I did find that quite antagonistic. He is a lord and his title is the Right Reverend, but, you know, call me Dave, whatever.
Father never have to be, so I'll take what I can get. Look, people have no idea who I am. I'm a Brit, obviously, originally. I'm a Canadian priest. I'm a boringly straight man, the father of 4 children, married for 35 years. And until about 10 years ago, I was still a Roman Catholic. And I suppose in many ways, I was the poster boy for opposition to equal marriage, to same-sex marriage. I hope I presented a fairly intelligent and reasonable opposition to it. But I had a radical change of heart and soul about this issue. Now, I've heard a lot of words used, very beautifully by you two in particular, but I'm not sure if I agree. We're talking about the terrible demise and decline of contemporary society. As an historian by training, I can't think of a time in history when people haven't said the same thing about the culture in which they live. We face many, many challenges. And I would agree there is an obsession about sex rather than sexuality that is dull and boorish, but we're not talking about that. And those people who simply want to enjoy themselves doing whatever they want to do without any responsibility or consequences, they're not the issue here. The issue is Christians who happen to be born gay, who want to celebrate their lifelong commitment before God in a church. Now, and I've written an entire book about this. I don't want to bore you for too long.
Well, let me push you on one angle of that, Father Michael, because is it not our job to talk about sin?
Oh, golly, yes. I mean, I'm relatively conservative on that issue. I'm a creedal Christian, and I have little time for some churches and clergy who want to completely expunge that word from the vocabulary. There is right and wrong, but I would argue that what is right, what is beautifully right, is the commitment of 2 people to spend their life together in selfless and sacrificial love. I think this is a direct replica of the godly image.
Right. But before we get to that, can I clarify?
If I may continue. The church, the idea that the church, there's a certain teaching and it can't change. On the issue of divorce, on the issue of suicide, on the issue, I'm speaking from North America, on the issue of interracial marriages, there are still churches in this continent that say no, and until very recently, they were simply forbidden.
Yes, but now you're conflating issues, Father, because interracial marriage has never been an issue of doctrine, and what we're talking about is sin. And you know, I've got my producer in my ear saying it's not as gay sex isn't a sin; it's legal. But I want to clarify that: is there a difference between sin and legality and civil legality? Because what is a sin is defined in the Scripture.
It's very interesting. It's very interesting you talk about, and I would agree with you, by the way, there can be bad laws. I mean, Martin Luther King said a bad law is not a law. And that's not the issue I'm talking about. And I'm not talking about changing with society. The notion that we should change because society has changed is morally redundant. I'm talking about changing ahead of society. We need to do the right and the ethical thing. You mentioned gay sex, which is very interesting because I don't want to be too personal, but I've been married 35 years now. And in all honesty, I don't think sex is the first thing on the mind of my wife and myself.
Just sin in general.
The poor woman. Wait, hold on, let me finish. You had a long time. Let's talk about gay love. Let's talk about love. Let's talk about two.
I'm out of time now. I'm very thankful for you for coming on.
Jesus, who follow the Gospels, who are of the same gender, who are born with that attraction, want to celebrate their marriage sacramentally. Let's talk about that.
The Reverend Michael Corrin, Anglican priest, thank you so much. And we also had there the author Gavin Ashenden, who was a former chaplain to Her Majesty the Queen Elizabeth II. Thank you so much for both for coming on. I like Michael Corrin. We disagree on plenty, but we had lots of good conversations online. In a 52-page essay, the Bishop of Oxford, the Right Reverend Dr. Stephen Croft, said, "I am sorry that corporately we have been so slow as a church to reach better decisions and practice on these matters. I am sorry that my own views were slow to change and that my actions and lack of action have caused genuine hurt, disagreement and pain. I remain on a very steep learning curve, listening to these pain and distress that has been key in my own journey and to the changes in my own views." There you have it, very fiery debate. Lots more on that online, on my Twitter and on my Substack. You are with GB News on TV, online and on radio. And after the break, I'll be joined by the former Border Force officer who says he knows what the government needs to do to get a grip on the ever-worsening migrant crisis. Now it's time to check the weather.
Let's look then at this evening's weather, and the UK is looking blustery and showery as that rain continues to push in from the west. Let's home in on the detail. Starting off today in the southwest, and there'll be heavy showers through much of the evening, some thundery and blustery as well, clear spells though in between. Heading further east, and they're fairly dry, often clear skies to the end of the day, though a few passing showers possible later on. A blustery and showery evening for much of Wales, those showers feeding back in on the brisk southwesterly winds, which will also turn heavy and thundery at times. Some showers also likely across parts of the Midlands. Those should be less intense than further west, but some heavy ones are still possible, things turning drier throughout the night. And mostly dry for the northeast of England as well, with fewer showers reaching there. Some mist and fog patches, though, developing there. They could be dense. Clear skies, though, meaning it'll turn chilly overnight in the end. Plenty of showers across Scotland as well, those likely to be heavy around the central belt, but it will be drier towards the north and east. And a few showers likely for parts of Northern Ireland. Here it's going to turn dry with clear spells for a time before rain arrives during the early hours of Monday. So the showers easing then for many overnight, with some dry weather before rain arrives from the west and the southwest later. And that's how this very mixed weather picture is shaping up into tomorrow morning.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Welcome back to the Common Sense Crusade on GB News, on TV, online and on your wireless. The UK's immigration crisis greatly intensified this week. Suella Braverman is facing legal action over the conditions at the Manston Migrant Centre and sparked outrage after referring to the influx of illegal immigrants as an invasion. Meanwhile, Robert Jenrick defended the government by pointing out that the large number of people crossing the channel makes processing them difficult. As if all that wasn't enough, the government faced a further embarrassment after it emerged that 2 groups from the migrant centre in Kent had been left stranded in London after a misunderstanding. My next guest is a former Border Force chief who says our asylum system is the worst he's ever known it, and he has some suggestions on how to fix it. So joining me now is Kevin Saunders. Kevin, thank you very much for giving us your time today. You've got lots of experience in this area, being a man on the ground for a number of years. What should the government do to solve this crisis?
Good afternoon. Well, I've suggested that they should re-look at an idea that was raised a couple of years ago by a retired naval gentleman who suggested sticking a cruise liner in international waters in the middle of the channel and taking everybody that comes across the channel directly to the cruise liner and doing the initial sifting, if you like, on the cruise liner. If it's in international waters, if it's not British flagged, then they can't claim asylum.
It sounds similar to what they do in Australia, am I right?
It's not dissimilar. And of course, even though lots of people will say the Australian system completely failed, it didn't. It stopped illegal migration into Australia. So
almost immediately.
It certainly stopped it, yes.
So it stopped them actually arriving in the country. Do you agree with Suella Braverman's use of the word invasion?
I think it was a little bit of a harsh word to use. However, on the other side, ask the people of Dover what they think. Because I was down in Dover week before last, and that's exactly the type of language that the locals there were using.
That's an interesting point, because the people complaining about the word are people who don't live in Kent, aren't they? And if an invasion is an incursion of people that are unwanted at the time, that does seem quite accurate, if not a bit incendiary. Do you think Suella Braverman...
Certainly incendiary, I would agree with you there, yes.
Yeah. Do you think the conditions at Manston are a problem, or is this hyperbole?
No, I mean, I do have some sympathy for both sides. I mean, Manston was set up originally to be basically a sifting station whereby you would get the people there for a few hours and then move them on. All sorts of problems, particularly last weekend when we had the firebomb attack at Manston, and the firebomb attack at Dover, which meant that 700 people had to be transferred to Manston straight away. So that produced a problem. I think they've got over the problem now because they're now moving people through much, much quicker. And I also understand that the government tend to extend Manston and actually put some proper accommodation in there.
People are cherry-picking Manston as a bad example, but we understand it costs £150 per night per refugee, up to about £7 million a day for the British taxpayer, doesn't it? So, the conditions can't be all that bad on the whole. Now, do you think the crisis has anything to do with us leaving the EU?
Nothing at all. No. We hear a lot of nonsense talked about this.
We do.
Particularly particularly the Remainers saying this didn't happen under Brexit, which is absolute rubbish, because it did. We've never really been able to remove people who have arrived as illegal migrants because they destroy their documents. And countries will not accept people back if there's no documentation. If they did, we wouldn't have had 100,000 people here in 2001 when the French refused to take everybody back.
Well, that was the former border chief, Kevin Saunders. Thank you, Kevin. Really good to get insightful knowledge from someone who's been on the ground. And plenty more to come in this conversation this afternoon. After the break, religion has been a prominent topic in debates about immigration and ethnic diversity over the past 15 years. This has led to concern about immigration's consequences for national cultures and to seemingly contradictory associations between Christianity and the attitudes towards immigration. We will debate that. But first, let's have a look at the weather.
Hello, let's bring you the very latest news headlines here on GB News. And the top story today, the leader of the Liberal Democrats has branded the Conservative Party incompetent and morally bankrupt. In a speech to the party conference, Ed Davey blamed the UK's rising cost of living on Russia's war in Ukraine and criticised the government's attempts to tackle the issue. He called for a stronger windfall tax on energy giants, higher taxes on banks, and said it was time for a general election.
Put a proper windfall tax on the blood oil profits of the fossil fuel giants. Reverse your tax cuts for the big banks. They are unfair and unnecessary, and use those extra billions to give people real help with energy bills, to protect pensions and benefits from inflation, to safeguard schools, hospitals and councils from cuts, and to help homeowners struggling to pay that Conservative property penalty.
Meanwhile, the UK's Alok Sharma has handed over to COP27 in Egypt with an opening speech urging world leaders to take concrete steps and fast to tackle global warming, saying inaction will lead to climate catastrophe. The president of the COP26 summit, which was hosted last year in Glasgow, admitted that despite progress over the last 12 months, the world is still not on track to keep global temperatures below 1.5 degrees. Tanzania's state media says at least 3 people have been killed after a passenger plane crashed into Lake Victoria. Rescue boats, emergency workers and bystanders have been helping to pull passengers to safety. 15 have been rescued so far. Local media reports the plane was trying to land in the city of Bukoba in stormy weather. The country's president has appealed for calm as the rescue operation continues. And the Prime Minister has announced an extra bank holiday to mark the King's coronation next year. The holiday will take place on Monday the 8th of May, after His Majesty's coronation on the Saturday. Rishi Sunak says he's looking forward to seeing people coming together and celebrating and paying tribute to King Charles III. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. With GB News, don't go anywhere. Calvin is back in just a tick.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today.
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News.
On Mark Dolan tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me every Friday, Saturday and Sunday for big guests, big opinions and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
Welcome back to the Common Sense Crusade on GB News, on TV, online and on your wireless with me, the Reverend Calvin Robinson. Immigration is a topic that is fraught with moral questions, and there is no consensus amongst Christians on how it should be viewed. On the one hand, Christians are called to love those on the margins, leading some to conclude that there should be fewer borders on immigration. However, others argue that mass migration leads to the disintegration of local communities and the uniqueness of particular nation states, and that people suffer in the absence of these things. More specifically, should Christians take issue with Suella Braverman's statement this week that the number of migrants crossing the Channel amounts to an invasion? Or what about the census results, which show that a record 1 in 6 people in this country were born abroad? Well, we have two Christians here on different perspectives who can discuss these questions and more. Still with me is the Reverend Michael Corran, Anglican priest and author, and Father Gavin Ashenden, the former chaplain to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Thank you for joining me again for this fiery debate. I want to start off with yourself, Father Gavin. Is it immoral to describe Channel crossings as an invasion?
I don't think it's a very good question with respect. I think we should change the question and ask what the effect of describing it as an invasion is. So those who are in favour of untrammeled immigration wouldn't want to describe it as that. They would want to describe it as the exercise of hospitality to a worldwide refugee problem. And they would probably think that we have the stability and resources within our community to welcome and wipe up any number of people. When you ask actually what the limit is, you don't get an answer. On the other hand, there are people who think that our society is stretched already to its limit in terms of the healthcare, the education, and the infrastructure that it can provide for its citizens. And if you ask them, then they feel that 10,000 Albanian young men arriving in their shores feels like an invasion. So whether or not you argue it etymologically and say linguistically it is one, or whether you say that's insensitive in a humanitarian sense, it isn't one, the question I think has to be faced. Do we have the resources to welcome this number of people in a worldwide migration crisis, and have the people of this country consented to it?
Okay, and then to you, Father Michael, what should the Christian view of immigration be as a whole?
I think that was a point very well made. I mean, a fundamental of this is the ability to discuss, which is why I've agreed to come on to a station where my views might not be flavour of the month, because I'm just sick and tired of both left and right refusing tolerance to other points of view. Look, I think the word invasion was incredibly ill-advised. More than that, I think it was ugly and unhelpful and destructive. It is entirely valid to have concerns about uncontrolled immigration, or certainly illegal immigration. That's entirely valid. My grandmother was born abroad. My father's family were East European Jews. I'm not sure if they came here legally or not, to be honest. There are all sorts of people who've come to this country by other means. But it is not unethical, it's not hysterical for people to say, what about us? Particularly working class people are often forgotten in this debate. But I don't think the Home Secretary achieved anything constructive, or if you like, Christian, by using the word invasion. And I think she used the word purposefully. I think it was to cause a certain ripple of fear, and we can do better than that. Let's have an open discussion. The context as a Christian is we should welcome the stranger. We could argue in the Hebrew scriptures that's actually about welcoming people who were of other tribes, and we won't get into that. Yeah. But reasonable, moderate approach, no hyperbole, no harsh language, no putting down people who simply have a different point of view. That's the Christian way forward.
I'm with you both. I think you're both talking a lot of sense. But there are a lot of people that, I mean, I get this rebuttal all the time, but you're a Christian, therefore you should be welcoming everyone. But the Bible isn't about having open borders. And if you'll indulge me for a moment, I've got one short scripture reading. When the Most High divided to the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set the bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. For the Lord portion is his people. And that's Deuteronomy. There's also much more on this in Acts. The boundaries of our nations, and nations and tribes is a theme throughout the Bible, were defined by God. Therefore, is there not a Christian duty to protect our nations and our borders? Father Gavin.
Do you know, Michael and I are almost swapping positions. I'm quite uncomfortable with the idea there's a Christian view on this. Not because I can't invent one, but because I think the way the discussion works is most people start off with their conclusion, which is I'm uncomfortable or I'm comfortable with this happening. And then they find a reason for justifying it. And I think to find your reason for justifying it and then say, well, it's Christian, it's actually is inappropriate. It's not the right thing to do. I hope all my views are Christian because I bring them to God when I pray and I process them and I challenge them. And if there's a stranger in my village where I live, I'll want to go and welcome him. I don't think that can be expanded to welcoming hundreds of thousands of people into a community without permission where the infrastructure won't cope with it. That simply isn't the same principle. And so is there a Christian view on this? I would say the Christian view would be how do you provide for the greatest stability and coherence of a society so that the people who live in it can flourish? And the answer is, to my mind, the levels of uncontrolled immigration that we're experiencing don't do that. So my Christian view would be don't have them.
Okay, and to Father Michael, should we be aiming for a borderless world?
Yes, but we also have to be practical. I mean, if resources and facilities had no limit, that would be something different. But we do have to protect people, particularly the most vulnerable. And we all know that those who are nearer the bottom, who have less, they will be the first to suffer if hospitals are overcrowded, if there are difficulties with food supply and so on. But I'll say again, the language has to be changed radically. There's not an invasion. The idea that somehow, I saw this in the United States, that everyone crossing a border is about to do crime and hurt others is simply untrue. We have, if at all possible, to welcome as many people as we can, reasonably and responsibly. I think there is a scriptural basis to that, but look, as Christians, we live in the real world, and as was just said, and extremely pertinent, it's one thing to be kind and generous and good to the person in the village, to give individual help to people. When it comes to mass policy, to international policy, to completely open a border will mean almost certainly that specific areas of the country, working people will suffer terribly because of that. So all of these things can be considered by responsible politicians, Christian or not. My problem with the current language is we're now hearing that everyone who comes to the UK is given a free car. I mean, it's simply untrue. Everyone is treated like a lord. It's simply untrue. There are terrible conditions. One of my daughters worked in Calais and saw what was really going on. It was absolutely dreadful. But if we, I suppose, increase the volume of language, we decrease the volume of empathy and understanding and intelligent, forward-looking, progressive policies. That, I believe, is the Christian response. Moderation, empathy, understanding, kindness. I'm not convinced, are you, that we're seeing it currently from the Home Secretary and others in government?
I mean, I'll put it to Father Gavin in a minute, but I think the reason we're seeing such high volume, as you call it, language is because people are so impassioned by this, and it is such an issue. And you said that not all people crossing are criminals, but we saw in the Telegraph this week that 50% of asylum seekers are not legitimate. And we've seen the rise in crime from Albanian gangs coming over, and we've also seen a lot of these problems in grooming gangs across the country. So we are seeing problems as a result, direct result of the increase in illegal and legal immigration in the country. I think that's why.
Remember, grooming gangs, some of those communities came here legally.
I said illegal and legal, but this is the problem. People are so impassioned because they care, and it's affecting their everyday lives. And I think that's probably why the language is getting dialed up a bit. Father Gavin, how do we tone it down a bit? How do we bring some moderation to this conversation?
Oh, well, once again, I'm going to disappoint you. I don't think I do want moderation. I think we have a problem with enormous consequences. And I'm very sympathetic to Swella Braveman using the word invasion, because although I think you could argue against it, she's doing it in order to ramp the political debate up. See, I have a small house in northern France, which is the most wonderful place, and I prefer to live there than in England, frankly. But the idea that the people in Calais are coming to England because they can't find political asylum in France. It's just nonsense. It's a far better culture over there, I think. They're coming for two reasons. One is that English is an accessible language that people have and French isn't, and that our state benefits are so enormously generous, and we don't get rid of people. I can't live in France. I'm only allowed 90 days there for 6 months. Why should these people who are... I don't understand why these people should be given a particular exemption from the rules and the laws that everybody else is exempt from, and at the same time doing it in a way where our infrastructure can't cope. I'm surrounded by elderly people who are desperate in real pain for knee and hip and other operations, and that the idea that we can simply take in the world's refugees and not displace our own vulnerable and elderly is just improper.
I'm with you. I want to give the last word to Father Michael, but if you can cut it down to 30 seconds, that would be helpful. But Father Ashington, there's one thing I found something to disagree with you on. The culture in France is not better than the culture in England.
We're not taking in the refugees. The countries that are taking the world's refugees are more like countries in Asia and Turkey are taking huge numbers of people. We've taken a relatively small number of people. Many of the people we have taken in over the last decades are the very people who perform the hip surgeries and the knee replacements in our hospitals. And I'm sorry, these people is not a term I'm comfortable with. Anytime we marginalise, most of the people who want to come to Britain are doing it out of desperation. A small number have ulterior motives, I would agree. And we have to be selective and elective. But let's be moderate and empathetic.
I'm not sure the evidence backs you up, but thank you for your stance nevertheless. That was the Reverend Michael Corran, Anglican priest and author, and Father Gavin Ashington, the former chaplain to Her Majesty the Queen Elizabeth II. Thank you both. Now, before we move on, let's have a look at what you've had to say about today's topics. On the Bishop of Oxford publicly backing gay marriage, Jack says, it's important that we move with the times. Homosexuals are not sinners, and it's Christian to say that it's not Christian to say that they are. It's actually quite shameful. That statement right there tells me you don't know much about the faith. I'm not being rude, but everyone is a sinner. So homosexual, everyone is a sinner, and it is to say it's not Christian to say that is bonkers, because it's the most Christian story there is. We are all sinners and we need to repent and find faith in God. That's what Christianity is all about. So there's nothing shameful in that, but thank you anyway. Neil disagrees. He says, I applaud your conviction, Calvin. It's refreshing to come across a religious person who sticks to their beliefs and doesn't follow fashion. That's very kind of you. Thank you. I wish more of our bishops would be doing the same. Susan, I'm a Christian and I have no problem with gay couples getting married in church. Love is love. I'm sorry, I have to pause on that phrase. Love is love. I detest that phrase. What does that mean? Love is love. First of all, it's boundaryless, and we can't have love without boundaries. Boundaries are important. For example, is it love for a grown man to be in a relationship with a young female child? No, it's not. Love is not always love. We have boundaries for a reason. Peter responds by saying, God is immutable, so is his teaching, and that's why the Christian doctrine on marriage cannot be changed. Here. You cannot change doctrine. That is idolatry and that is arrogance on our part. We are not bigger than Scripture. We're not bigger than God. Thank you all for getting in touch. I really appreciate that. And now moving on to the next topic, it's widely reported that Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt are set to announce a round of tax rises and spending cuts in their upcoming autumn statement to try and plug the 50 billion black hole in Britain's public finances. Amongst the measures expected to be announced are an increase in the headline rate of capital gains tax and increased taxes on dividends. This comes as Rishi Sunak has said that people cannot expect the state to fix every problem, as he vowed to regain the trust of voters by being honest about the scale of economic difficulties ahead. Joining me in the studio is my panel for the next half hour. We have the wonderful Kathy sorry, how do you pronounce it? Ginjal. Thank you, Kathy. I love Kathy. I've known Kathy for a long time, still can't pronounce her surname. Editor of The Conservative Woman. And of course, the fantastic Peter Edwards, former editor of Labour List. Now, Kathy, can Rishi Sunak, on the one hand, say that we can't expect the state to fix all our problems, and then on the other hand, increase tax and cut spending?
Well, when I walked past... Hello, Calvin. Hello. Nice to have you on. Hello. I walked past the newsstand yesterday morning and saw that headline, and I gasped. I thought, Rishi Sunak, you have got some face, you've got some nerve. The state just created all the problems over the last, not just particularly over the last 2 years over lockdown. Under your watch, the public debt grew to what, 2.5 trillion? something like that. Last June, I think he was still Chancellor last June, we had the biggest debt repayment ever of 19 billion in 1 month. And of course, this is the black hole they're trying to follow now. This was the direct result of an unnecessary 2-year lockdown that was cruel and destructive, that began to shrink the economy then. It was the result of furloughing people, and it is quite an extraordinary thing. So he's playing on a sort of conservative view that the state can't fix everything, which I totally agree with. But it is so hypocritical and so wrong, and we're now being gaslit into taxes, incredibly high taxes, which will further shrink the economy. Liam Halligan wrote a wonderful, your Liam, GB News' Liam, in the Telegraph today, and it's the wrong tax at the wrong time, and it's going to have disastrous consequences. It will cripple us.
I tend to agree with you, but Peter, do you have a different stance?
Well, I'm not sure I'd use the word gaslighting, but I think Rishi Sunak's getting his excuses in first.
Right.
I think The Times got a great scoop, the first kind of major print interview with the new Prime Minister, but he didn't actually say very much. And when pushed on tax, he said, I'm not going to say anything on tax this week until the kind of so-called fiscal update in a few weeks' time. So I think he's getting the mood music out there, which is very negative. But clearly, what we do know is not coming from the Prime Minister. It's coming from essentially briefings from Downing Street and the Treasury about massive tax rises. We're already in a cost of living crisis. I think what's interesting and likely to be quite painful, if you cast your mind back to the last round of austerity about 10 years ago, the balance was around 80-20, George Osborne would always say. So that's about 80% of the saving on spending cuts and about 20% on tax rises. Now, 10 years on, it looks like we're going to have austerity part 2 the other way around. What I'd say is, obviously, we need to get the deficit under control, but as a Labour person that believes in trying to grow the economy through, if you like, Keynesian principles without sounding too grand, George Osborne choked off the last economic recovery in 2010, 11, 12. It's entirely possible the same thing will happen again.
This is the problem, isn't it? We've got a Prime Minister trying to solve problems that he, as a Chancellor, created. And we heard in the headline there, 50 billion black hole, but actually they borrowed 400 billion during the cost of lockdown crisis during the pandemic. And there's a 17 billion that got lost in fraud. So there's a lot of black holes to be plugged. Raising taxes isn't the solution, though, is it? And Cathy, is this, I mean, I don't want to call it austerity because it's not really austerity, it's a mess. Is this going to turn off the red voters, the red wall voters? Have the Conservative Party lost the middle ground now?
I think they've lost anyway, and not to say Keir Starmer's got anything better to offer. I suspect he'll follow on much the same track. But, you know, really, every voter needs to wake up to the fact that what they complied with and agreed with, including the unions, what they all complied with was 2 years of destruction of the economy and mental health and all the other things, and crippling, you know, making it a COVID-only service that didn't work because everyone was at home because they'd been in touch with somebody who'd got COVID, and it was based on a false, you know, theory. In that time, the interesting thing is, in that time, the public sector actually grew, despite all this, by 24%. So we've had a private sector that's been progressively strangled under Conservative regimes. This is what's extraordinary. So we probably share the same, not the same analysis, but the same sort of anger, in a way, of the particular hypocrisies and recklessness of this government. So what Liam says in the paper today, and he's actually quite right, this will finish off the small businesses, SMEs. It will finish off this already strangulated private sector on which we depend. And this is the sector that is being taxed. This is the sector you depend on for taxes, because the rest of the... so many workers are in a tax and churn situation with tax on the one hand and getting benefits on the other.
Cathy, you're hitting the nail on the head, as you always do. You know, SMEs almost died throughout lockdown. Pubs are dying in record numbers, 7,000 closed this year, I believe. The high street has been decimated, and it looks like this is the final kick in the teeth.
And the corporation tax going up is just appalling.
To give the last word to Peter, you know, Labour have been, all throughout this pandemic, Labour was saying we'd push the same situation but harder and longer, therefore would have had even worse economic circumstances. What are Labour proposing as a fix to this?
Well, I'm not sure I accept that analysis. I felt no one wanted a lockdown, but I felt we had no choice but to have one. You're right that Keir Starmer, I think particularly on a third lockdown, called for an earlier lockdown than that agreed, slightly reluctantly, by Boris Johnson. But I don't think that's a particular partisan view, and I don't think it's particularly unique to Britain view, because there were lockdowns in major economies, and I think parties of left and right and the centre had lockdowns. So that would imply it's not a particularly British view of the world. It was a view that several major economies had, and that gives me comfort that while I oppose Boris Johnson on many things, it was the right thing to do. My concern now, and obviously we're talking about the future, is this phrase we hear about the people with the broadest shoulders will bear the greatest burden. Now, that was a promise made in around 2010 by Cameron and Osborne, and they broke that promise. And we're already starting to hear the same phrase being used again, and I'm worried the promise will be broken again.
And there we have it. Thank you very much, both of you. That's Cathy Jingle, editor of The Conservative Woman, and Peter Edwards, former editor of Labour List. You are watching Calvin's Common Sense Crusade with me, the Reverend Calvin Robertson, and I'll be back with you after this short break.
Let's look then at this evening's weather, and the UK's looking blustery and showery as that rain continues to push in from the west. Let's home in on the detail. Starting off today in the southwest, and there'll be heavy showers through much of the evening, some thundery and blustery as well, clear spells though in between. Heading further east, and they're fairly dry, often clear skies to the end of the day, though a few passing showers possible later on. A blustery and showery evening for much of Wales, those showers feeding back in on the brisk southwesterly winds, which will also turn heavy and thundery at times. Some showers also likely across parts of the Midlands. Those should be less intense than further west, but some heavy ones are still possible, things turning drier throughout the night. And mostly dry for the northeast of England as well, with fewer showers reaching there. Some mist and fog patches, though, developing there. They could be dense. Clear skies, though, meaning it'll turn chilly overnight in the end. Plenty of showers across Scotland as well, those likely to be heavy around the central belt, but it will be drier towards the north and east. And a few showers likely for parts of Northern Ireland. Here it's going to turn dry, with clear spells for a time before rain arrives during the early hours of Monday. So the showers easing then for many overnight, with some dry weather before rain arrives from the west and the southwest later. And that's how this very mixed weather picture is shaping up into tomorrow morning.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. There's never been a more interesting but also critical time in British politics, and I can't wait to bring you the biggest stories of the day with the best factual accuracy and also a few of my own opinions thrown in. We'll engage in passionate but always polite debate with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12 on TV, on radio and online.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV,
on radio
and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's
news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Every Saturday at 2 o'clock, join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain. I'm not afraid to give you a platform and say it how it is.
Come on, make the case. Something like this is very, very important to people.
And we're always up for a laugh on this show.
God, honestly, you'd think there were no problems in the world.
Real Britain, every Saturday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Hello and welcome back. This is Calvin's Common Sense Crusade on your TV, radio and online. This hour I'll be asking, is public patience for unions running out? Should Rishi Sunak snub COP27? And Conservative author and philosopher Yoram Hazony will join me to discuss his latest book. But first, let's get you up to date with your latest news headlines.
Good afternoon. It's just after 4 o'clock and the leader of the Liberal Democrats has branded the Conservative Party incompetent and morally bankrupt. In a speech to the party conference today, Sir Ed Davey blamed the UK's rising cost of living on Russia's war in Ukraine and criticised the government's attempts to tackle the issue. He called for a stronger windfall tax on energy giants, higher taxes on banks and said it was time for a general election.
After inflicting so much chaos, the Conservatives want the rest of us to pay to clear up their mess. They're already talking about more unfair tax rises, more cuts to pensions and benefits, more cuts to schools, the police, even our NHS. All to fill the hole they themselves created. It's like they robbed our bank and now they're asking us for a loan to buy their getaway car. Well, we say no. Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt, instead of inflicting even more pain on struggling families and pensioners, it's time to start helping. Put a proper windfall tax on the blood oil profits of the fossil fuel giants. Reverse your tax cuts for the big banks. They are unfair and unnecessary. And use those extra billions to give people real help with energy bills, to protect pensions and benefits from inflation, to safeguard schools, hospitals and councils from cuts, and to help homeowners struggling to pay that Conservative property penalty.
Well, also today, the UK's Alok Sharma has handed over to COP27 in Egypt with an opening speech urging world leaders to take concrete steps and fast to tackle global warming, saying inaction will lead to climate catastrophe. The president of COP26 summit, which was hosted last year in Glasgow, admitted despite progress in the last year, the world is not on track to keep global temperatures below 1.5 degrees.
How many more wake-up calls do world leaders actually need? A third of Pakistan underwater, the worst flooding in Nigeria in a decade. This year, the worst drought in 500 years in Europe, in 1,000 years in the US, and the worst on record in China.
And the Prime Minister will pledge to make the UK a clean energy superpower when he addresses the COP27 summit tomorrow, urging all countries to move away from fossil fuels. He'll warn that tackling global warming is fundamental to future prosperity and security. Mr Sunak will also argue that the shock in the oil and gas markets caused by Russia's invasion of Ukraine highlights the need to move to cheaper and cleaner sources of energy. And the government's announced that a casework pilot scheme to reduce the backlog in asylum seekers will be rolled out nationwide by 2023. The Home Office says the 8-week pilot programme reduced the time asylum seekers waited for a first interview by around 40%. Almost 100,000 migrants are currently awaiting a decision on their asylum claim. The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, says the programme will digitise applications and speed up the process. Well, our other top story on GB News today, nurses across the UK have, for the first time, voted in favour of national strike action in a dispute over pay. More than 300,000 members of the Royal College of Nursing were balloted in the biggest ever in the union's 106-year history. The walkouts are set to take place within a few weeks, possibly before Christmas. And it's likely patients will face disruption to both surgical operations and appointments. Tanzania's state media says at least 3 people have been killed after a passenger plane crashed into Lake Victoria. 43 people were believed to be on board. 26 have been rescued so far. Emergency workers and bystanders have been helping to pull passengers to safety. Precision Air is Tanzania's largest privately owned airline. Local media reporting the plane was trying to land at the city of Bukoba after stormy weather. Here, National Highways has secured a court order to stop Just Stop oil protesters from disrupting traffic on the M25. The order states that anyone entering the motorway, attaching themselves to any object or structure on it or assisting others can be held in contempt of court. Protesters could face imprisonment, an unlimited fine and the seizure of assets. Tickets for Glastonbury 2023 went on release today and sold out within an hour. The site initially experienced a few technical problems, with the site continuously crashing under the weight of demand. Tickets for the event sell at around £350 each. And lastly, the Prime Minister has announced an extra bank holiday to mark the King's coronation next year. The holiday will take place on Monday the 8th of May, after His Majesty's coronation on the Saturday. Rishi Sunak says he looks forward to seeing people come together, celebrate and pay tribute to King Charles III. You're with GB News, more news as it happens.
Hello and welcome to the Common Sense Crusade with me, the Reverend Calvin Robinson. Here's what's coming up this afternoon. Passengers are being warned of extensive disruption to train services despite a series of strikes by railway workers being called off. Network Rail warned that services would remain extremely limited, with trains tomorrow almost likely to be affected. Are the unions at fault? Rishi Sunak has promised the UK's global leadership on fighting climate change will continue after its COP presidency ends, ahead of the Prime Minister attending the summit after a U-turn. Is he trying to make a difference, or is this more hollow gesture politics? The government has announced an additional bank holiday to mark the coronation of King Charles III next year, and according to the Scottish Mail, Prince Andrew was left bereft and tearful when Charles, as Prince of Wales, told him he would never return to royal duties. Former royal butler Grant Harold will join me to discuss this. And of course, you can join in any of our discussions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet at gbviews. Deus Volt. Mainstream conservatism today in this country is almost entirely identified with as classical liberalism, the idea that preserving the autonomy of the individual should be the principle which governs society. That's why you see so few Conservative MPs that are socially conservative. To suggest that there are moral rules which people ought to follow is to infringe on people's freedom of choice. But is there another, better way to conceptualise conservative philosophy? My next guest certainly thinks so. Now, joining me in the studio is the conservative political philosopher and author of Conservatism, A Rediscovery, Yoram Hazony. Yoram, first of all, thank you so much for joining me today. I know you've just arrived in the UK straight from the airport to the studio, so I really do appreciate that. Conservatism is in a mess in this country, it really is. Most people who identify as conservative are neoliberals, and even the neoliberals aren't entirely fiscally conservative. So when we have fiscal conservatism disappearing at the moment, conservative socialism going down the drain at the same time, where do we look to rediscover conservatism?
Well, conservatism is, you could say, is the most beautiful and extraordinary fruit of many hundreds of years of English and later British politics. Yeah. And countries all over the world, whether it's America or Europe or elsewhere, I'm from Israel, look to England and to the UK in order to try to understand conservatism. So when we come to a crisis such as what we have now, where even liberalism has ceased to be something that is, I mean, you can say that after the Second World War, liberalism kind of became the public religion throughout Europe and in America and so on. But as of the last few years, even liberalism, people are fired from the jobs for being liberals. Yeah. And the question is, this woke neo-Marxism, which is presenting itself as the new public philosophy, the new public religion in Britain and elsewhere. What is strong enough to stop it? What could possibly stop it? And conservatives have an answer. Conservatism, the Anglo-American conservative tradition is a tradition that is based on the nation, it's based on religion, that looks to the question of how can we make this nation flourish into the future generations going forward? How can we have a life of conservation and transmission? Right. Now, you'll notice that this is not liberalism. It can have some alliances with liberalism. But a liberal is someone who thinks, as you said before, a liberal is someone who thinks, well, look, if I know about the freedom of the individual and the equality of the individual and the consent, then I know everything I need to know about politics. And a conservative says, why no? There are things we inherit from past generations. Those things are necessary so that there should be an England going into the future. How will there be a UK in 300 or 400 years if there's no conservation and transmission? So that's the question that we need to ask. And that, I think, is the role of a conservative party.
Well, at the moment, the Conservative Party isn't very conservative, but we do have a grassroots movement that's growing, calling itself the New Right. And I believe you have a similar situation in America. But touching on American politics very briefly, is Trump a conservative?
Well, in some ways he is, and in some ways he's not. Trump comes out of a tradition that's probably better called nationalist. Right. Although in the UK, as in America and in other countries, there has been a tension between nationalist conservatives and internationalist liberals, globalist liberals, yes. Because liberalism in itself doesn't really have a problem with it being a universal system that simply takes over the entire globe. Yeah. Whereas if you're a traditionalist, if you're a conservative, then you're much more concerned with your particular nation, just as you're concerned with your own tradition. So Trump enters the stage at the same moment that Brexit appears in the UK. And the question is he conservative? Is Brexit conservative? I think that the answer to that question is basically yes. That if Trump's goal is to return to Americans a thinking about their own nation, its traditions, its interests, rather than thinking about the entire globe, then that does make him a kind of conservative. Of course, he could be more conservative. Indeed.
But in that, I think you've identified and articulated the problem that we're facing, in that a lot of our politicians right now are globalist liberalists, or liberal globalists, however you want to term it. Now, the grassroots in the country tend to be nationalist conservatives. And the problem is that we see nationalism as, associated with Nazism. We see it as inherently bad. But is it not the only way to protect a nation from the snake that eats itself, that is globalist liberalism? Is national conservatism the answer? And if so, how do we redefine that in British terms? Do we refer back to Burke?
Well, look, you're right that the word nationalist has certainly been tainted because Hitler used it to describe his biological imperialism. His goal was to take over the entire world, as he wrote in Mein Kampf, and that he called nationalism. Our nation is going to rule the world. A more common sense and traditional use of the word nationalist would be to say that a nationalist is someone who thinks that the world is governed best when many different nations have the ability to chart their own course independently. Yeah. All right. So that kind of a nationalism, I think, it fits even with certainly with the English tradition going back to Fortescue and Selden and Burke and many others, all the way up to even John Stuart Mill. I think you could argue is that kind of a nationalist. And it is the only answer. I mean, this kind of nationalist conservatism is the only answer when what you're facing is a World Economic Forum whose goal is worldwide liberalism controlled by them. The EU is pretty much the same kind of creature. It would be, it would be nice if it were a confederation of sovereign nations, but that's not what the people running it want. What they want is a kind of an empire, a liberal empire without borders, whose influence will be universal. And of course, we've already seen, if you want the UK to be the UK, it can't do that when someone above you is picking up the phone and calling you, telling you what you should be.
Which is why we left the EU. We left the EU and fell into the trap of the WEF as a replacement for global liberalism. But even I'm tripping up on the language here. And is this not part of the problem? And I think this might be part of the reason that you released this. So this is Yoram's new book, Conservatism, A Rediscovery. Can you tell us why you felt that now was the time for this?
Well, I began writing this book after the summer of 2020, when the neo-Marxists, just to pick a watershed moment, the neo-Marxists take over the New York Times and begin firing all sorts of senior people because they're liberals. And at that moment, the hegemony of the old post-World War II liberalism collapsed. There's still plenty of liberals, but at this moment, we're actually watching a kind of a melee to try to determine what's going to be next, what's going to happen next after liberalism. People sometimes call it post-liberalism. Yes. And this book is an entry. It says, look, conservatism isn't liberalism. Conservatism is something else, something much more important and much better. And it deserves a hearing to be the next thing after liberalism.
Here, and I can highly recommend this book myself. It helps me articulate the problem, even if I'm not doing so well today. But Yoram Hazani, thank you so much. Conservative author and political philosopher. His book is called Conservatism, A Rediscovery. And it's time now for Calvin's Concern segment. And in this segment, we take a brief moment to see what you've had to say about a story that I find troubling. I took to Twitter and said, census data shows in the year to mid-2020, we saw an estimated 622,000 people immigrating to the UK. Home Office stats show 1.1 million immigrants to the UK in the year to mid-2022. Record high visas granted, immigration nearly doubled. Do we have an open borders policy? Well, you had plenty to say on this topic. Panju says, immigration that is selective and controlled should be welcome as it benefits the country in many ways. It's uncontrolled immigration, uncontrolled illegal immigration, similar to what we are seeing with the small boats, that is the problem. Is that the problem, though, Panju? Because maybe we have 40,000 legal immigrants, but we've got 1.1 million legal immigrants, and our system is under strain. Housing, education, etc. Are both of them still an issue when the government's promising to control it and they're not doing so? Peter says, I think we need to do better discussion around a net migration cap, but we must look at foreign policy. Our net migration cap must be a country-by-country basis in order to allow scenarios like Spain, where many expats move to. We cannot alienate allies. That is quite sensible, Peter. We should be looking at this on a country-by-country basis, but also what point is a cap if we're not following it or sticking to it? Terry goes on to say, there is no open borders policy. If there was an open borders policy, there wouldn't be any visas required. Well, if there is no open border policy, how come we have record high levels of immigration, and that has been going on for the last 20 years? Where are the borders? John says, Father, if border force and police are apprehending and deporting people, then it's not an open border. It means you have a border. An open border means a border that enables free movement of people between jurisdictions with no restrictions on movement. Well, if I suggest to you, John, that if people are crossing the border without being deterred or without being returned, then we do have an open border, and the numbers speak for themselves. Thank you for all of your thoughts, though. I really do appreciate the emails and tweets. Plenty more to come on this afternoon on my Common Sense Crusade. After the break, Rishi Sunak has promised the UK's global leadership on fighting climate change will continue after its COP presidency ends, ahead of the Prime Minister attending the summit after a U-turn. Is he trying to make a difference, or is this more hollow gesture politics? But first, let's take a look at the weather.
Let's look then at this evening's weather, and the UK's looking blustery and showery as that rain continues to push in from the west. Let's home in on the detail. Starting off today in the southwest, and there'll be heavy showers through much of the evening, some thundery and blustery as well, clear spells though in between. Heading further east, and they're fairly dry, often clear skies to the end of the day, though a few passing showers possible later on. A blustery and showery evening for much of Wales, those showers feeding back in on the brisk southwesterly winds, which will also turn heavy and thundery at times. Some showers also likely across parts of the Midlands. Those should be less intense than further west, but some heavy ones are still possible, things turning drier throughout the night. And mostly dry for the northeast of England as well, with fewer showers reaching there. Some mist and fog patches, though, developing there. They could be dense. Clear skies, though, meaning it'll turn chilly overnight in the end. Plenty of showers across Scotland as well, those likely to be heavy around the central belt, but it will be drier towards the north and east. And a few showers likely for parts of Northern Ireland. Here it's going to turn dry, with clear spells for a time before rain arrives during the early hours of Monday. So the showers easing then for many overnight, with some dry weather before rain arrives from the west and the southwest later. And that's how this very mixed weather picture is shaping up into tomorrow morning.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something weird happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak.
Stop talking. My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, the briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
Welcome back to the Common Sense Crusade on GB News, on TV, online and on your wireless. Rishi Sunak performed a U-turn this week on his decision not to attend COP27 in Egypt, following a backlash confirming he will now attend and promising that the UK will lead the fight against climate change. The Prime Minister initially said he planned to miss the summit to focus on more pressing domestic matters such as tackling rising inflation, the migrant crisis and preventing blackouts, but changed his mind after opposition leaders accused him of not taking climate change seriously enough. But should Rishi Sunak have stuck to his guns and snubbed COP27? And to give his views on this story, I'm joined by business columnist at The Telegraph, Andrew Orlovsky. Andrew, thank you very much for joining us today. Could you please tell us why you think Rishi Sunak should snub COP27?
Well, I think not attending COP27 would actually show some moral courage and moral leadership. Let me explain. The process that COP is designed to fulfill is a political consensus around the world. And it became very obvious, really, for the last 2 or 3 climate conferences that wasn't going to happen. There's an enormous split between poorer countries which need fossil fuels to make their citizens wealthier, to bring them up to the living standards that we enjoy, and the West, the developed world, which is trying to stop them doing that. So I think there's great moral leadership to be shown by demonstrating that the poorer countries need fossil fuels because there's really no substitute for them at the moment. What's really interesting this year, so let's wind back to Glasgow. Glasgow was the moment when we saw that there wasn't going to be any agreement. Any future COPs were completely redundant because China and India are going to develop that coal. But what's happened this year, which is I find fascinating, is that Africa is now pushing back very, very strongly at the idea that it shouldn't develop as well.
Well, do you think Boris Johnson announcing he would attend the COP summit influenced Rishi Sunak's U-turn?
I've no idea what goes on at the upper echelons of the Conservative Party. I'm not a Conservative, but I do think I was quite appalled to see Ed Miliband this morning saying that we needed to show global solidarity with the poorer nations, when the exact opposite is happening. It's the West that's breached that social contract. You see, for all my lifetime, we've put the needs of the poorest people in the world paramount. There used to be a political disagreement how you'd solve poverty in developing countries. Communists would say that their way was the best, and the West would say that growth and capitalism was the best. But there was a united goal there to put human beings, human life first. In the last 20 years, we've kind of broken that, and human life is secondary to the weather.
Well, yeah, well, indeed. But let's talk about the last 20 years, because this is the 27th COP summit. And if continued warnings of environmentalists are anything to go by, very little, if any, progress has been made on fighting so-called climate change. So is attending a COP summit pretty pointless anyway?
I think it is. It seems to be a very narcissistic kind of event where this new religion of environmentalism, the followers of it kind of reassure themselves that they're the most moral people. But I think, as I said a moment ago, I think there's an enormous break where you don't put human beings first, where you you don't actually put them paramount. I mean, this has been a principle since the Enlightenment. It's at the core of every religion that human beings are really quite special. And I think this is a historic break, really, philosophically anyway.
I agree. I think it's almost climate worship rather than a climate crisis, isn't it? And you're right to point to it started in the Enlightenment, but where do you think it ends, Andrew?
I'm not sure. I see an enormous social unrest because people will make great sacrifices during a war. We saw people make great sacrifices during a lockdown. If the end result is worth it, people will do that. But what you're actually asking people in Britain and the West to do is to make enormous sacrifices that make no difference at all to the climate. There are other ways of tackling climate change that are far smarter, that don't involve punishing the weakest members of society and the most vulnerable.
If it even is an issue. Thank you so much. That was Andrew Orlovsky, business columnist at The Telegraph. Thanks for your time today. You are with GB News on TV, radio and online, and after the break, the government has announced an additional bank holiday to mark the coronation of King Charles III next year. And according to the Scottish Mail, Prince Andrew was left bereft and tearful when Charles, as Prince of Wales, told him he would never return to royal duties. Former royal butler Grant Harold will join me to discuss this. Now it's time to check on those news headlines. There's Polly.
And the top stories this hour, the leader of the Liberal Democrats has branded the Conservative Party incompetent and morally bankrupt. In a speech to the party conference, Ed Davey blamed the UK's rising cost of living on Russia's war in Ukraine, and he criticised the government's attempts to tackle the issue. He called for a stronger windfall tax on energy giants, higher taxes on banks, and said it was time for a general election.
Put a proper windfall tax on the blood oil profits of the fossil fuel giants. Reverse your tax cuts for the big banks. They are unfair and unnecessary, and use those extra billions to give people real help with energy bills, to protect pensions and benefits from inflation, to safeguard schools, hospitals and councils from cuts, and to help homeowners struggling to pay that Conservative property penalty.
Well, the UK's Alok Sharma has handed over to COP27 in Egypt with an opening speech urging world leaders to take concrete steps and fast to tackle global warming, adding inaction will lead to climate catastrophe. The president of the COP26 summit, which was hosted last year in Glasgow, admitted that despite progress in the last year, the world is not on track to keep global temperatures below 1.5 degrees. Tanzania state media says at least 19 people have been killed after a passenger plane crashed into Lake Victoria. Rescue boats, emergency workers and bystanders have been helping to pull passengers to safety. 26 have been rescued so far. Local media reports the plane was trying to land in the city of Bukoba in stormy weather. The country's president has called for calm as the rescue continues. And the Prime Minister has announced an extra bank holiday to mark the King's coronation next year. The holiday will take place on Monday the 8th of May, after His Majesty's coronation on the Saturday. Rishi Sunak says he looks forward to seeing people come together to celebrate and pay tribute to King Charles III. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Calvin is back in just a moment.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today.
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course fun every Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News.
On Mark Dolan tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me every Friday, Saturday and Sunday for big guests, big opinions and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
Welcome back to Common Sense Crusade on GB News on TV, online and on your wireless. Railway passengers are being told to expect severe disruption to train services this week, despite a series of strikes being called off. On Friday, the RMT union unexpectedly announced that strikes scheduled for November the 5th, 7th and 9th had been called off to make further discussions with rail companies easier. But train services on Saturday were still heavily disrupted, and Network Rail has warned that services on Monday are also likely to be affected. So I'm asking, is the public now running out of patience with striking unions? Still with me in the studio is the editor of The Conservative Woman, Cathy Gingell, and the former editor of The Labour List, Peter Edwards. I saw you nodding there. I got it right that time, didn't I? Thank you, Cathy. Now, I am of the mindset that the government should finish the job that Thatcher started and cut these unions down to shape, cut them down to size. What do you think, Cathy?
Well, I was talking to Peter just in the break, and this takes you back to the end of the Callaghan years. It did for Callaghan. But the difference is here. There were unions striking under a Labour government. Now we've got unions striking under a Conservative government. And I can't see... I'm not quite sure whether this Conservative government's got the strength that Thatcher had when she came in, assuming the public is totally dismayed because they're grinding the country to the halt. I was just looking up the number of different public sector workers who are threatening to strike. I mean, really, the country will be crippled very soon, and they're all basically striking over their average pay. If you look at it, they're on average pay, it's low. It's not great. I'm not pretending any of this is good with the cost of living, but that's fundamentally what they're striking for in a highly unproductive public sector area where services generally people think are bad. I can't see public sympathy lasting, but I'm not sure this government has any notion how to deal with it.
No, and Peter, people striking for more pay when everyone's struggling to get by as it is that going to help with the public sentiment?
We've got to be realistic. It's not more pay. They're looking for real terms pay growth. So there's different trade unions and different train operating companies, and I have to correct you, most of it is a private sector because they're train operating companies, but these are people that have had pay cuts. They're only asking for a pay rise in cash terms, but inflation is 10%. So if, as some parts of the rail industry, you're offered 4 + 2 + 2 conditional, the best case scenario is you still have a 2% real pay terms cut. And, you know, if you've got rent to pay, a mortgage to pay, you've got a husband or wife to feed, children to feed, it's perfectly reasonable. You don't want your pay to go down. I think that's why there has been quite a high level of public support so far for the rail strikes. Obviously, we had on-off strikes in the summer, and I felt the government actually handled it wrongly. Grant Shapps, who was the Transport Secretary, was just rude. He just said the rail unions were selfish and he didn't attend talks. So that's not pragmatic and it's not acting in the passengers' interest.
But the language you use there, Peter, is already problematic, isn't it? When we're talking about, actually, they're not asking for more pay, they're asking for real terms pay growth because of inflation. Well, everyone's pay's gone down because of inflation, but they're asking for more money from the public purse, which means that the taxpayer is going to be contributing more. Is that not the case?
No, I disagree with a lot of that. And I talked about their real pay being maintained, but not necessarily growing. They're simply asking for it to maintain. But the bottom line is, if inflation is 10% and the biggest pay rise anyone gets is up to 8%, you're still worse off in real terms. That means you have less money to spend on food or rent or mortgage or your kids.
Well, I agree with the problem, because we're all worse off in real terms in the current climate, but we're still looking to get more money somewhere from the public purse to pay to the public sector.
Well, what everyone keeps saying, the public sector, there are private train operating companies with perhaps a less adversarial and a more productive attitude, some of these strikes could be avoided. I'm not so naive enough to say they all could have been avoided, but you keep saying the public sector, they're in the private sector.
A lot of the sectors that are striking are public, though.
Yeah, but we're talking about trains. If you want to go on to nurses later, of course.
We'll stick with trains then, because if this is the private sector and people are striking because they want more pay, surely in the private sector they could just hire more people, replace them.
Well, I don't think it's quite like that. They're doing these... I mean, Peter also has more expertise on it, but it's National Rail and the companies. I don't know how they're managing these talks. I wish I did. I'm sorry I'm not better informed about it, but I think this is an impossible situation for this union to be dealing and negotiating with so many different players in this. And National Rail and the government, it's sort of a bit spurious that they call themselves, what, a public management company, National Rail? But I think they're basically paid for by the government. So it's all a bit spurious. I tend to agree. I'd rather see direct negotiations between individual companies and the unions. That, to me, would seem to be a better working of a free market. And that's not happening. But the problem is everybody, as Calvin said, everybody's real pay is going down. And if they draw the country to a halt, the economy is going to suffer even more drastically. The recession's going to get worse. And in the end, people will be laid off. And in the end, unemployment's going to go up. So my problem is, not that I don't have sympathy, but they're cutting off their nose to spite their face, as will every different union or industry organisation, whether it's Royal College of Nursing, who are threatening strikes. And there's one after the other who are now threatening strikes.
Well, may I respond to that?
Well, I'll come to you in a second, Peter, because I do want to... You just said you had support, and Peter did say that they have public support. Do you support these strikes?
I mean, I think I go crazy if I'm travelling to work, and the commuters, it's appalling. So if I don't have to commute, I work from home fundamentally. So, but I think if I were a commuter, I would be desperate by now. And if especially I was a commuter running my own small private business, I'd be desperate. So I wouldn't support them, no. Not to say that I still don't have sympathy, because people are struggling with it. And what the government could do different things. They could stop subsidising stupid renewables. They could stop...
May I respond?
Sorry, yes, sorry. Beg your pardon.
So I don't think Britain's grinding to a halt, and this phrase was used in the summer. There's no evidence for that at all, and actually trains ran on the strike days. No one wants strikes, but I completely understand why unions are doing this, and I support the right to strike. But let's not spread the idea that the country is grinding to a halt. It's not. I'm about 40. In my lifetime, the number of strike days across the whole economy has fallen by 90%, 9-0. We saw that this summer. There were strikes and trains ran. And that's why there was a degree of public support. And I worry that certainly from government ministers and a little bit in the media as well, some of the rhetoric is hugely overblown.
OK, so you say the country's not grinding to a halt, but we just heard there in the headlines that even though the strike was called off, people are still having difficulty getting trains today. There's still heavy delays and suspensions and continuing into next week. So in what way do you suggest it's not grinding to a halt?
Well, I don't deny there is disruption today. I think there always is on a Sunday because of engineering, but clearly the calling off the strike quite late on has played a part in that, but doesn't that support the idea that you actually get round the negotiating table earlier on rather than making a concession at the absolute 11th hour, which is what Network Rail have done when they've now said a pay offer will be made, and they'd not said that previously. So if you're putting passengers first, don't make a concession at 1 minute to midnight, get round the negotiating table with the right intentions to put passengers first, because there will always be disruption. Remember, no one wants to go on strike, but the people who pay the price are people working in industry who give up a day's pay and passengers. So it doesn't help anyone. But that's a reason to negotiate.
I would suggest, Cathy, that negotiation should come before a strike, and strike should be always a last resort. It seems to me these days everyone wants to strike in the first instance.
It is a last resort.
We've heard that, it doesn't seem so, we've heard that nurses, civil servants, barristers are also looking to have strikes. Is this becoming a French situation that we just strike at the left?
Well, that's why it's reminding me about going back to all those years when the country did really nearly grind to a halt with it all, and the unions had to be sort of taken on. I mean, I have got sympathy with rail workers, because I think the whole setup since privatisation was so bad. It was so badly done. I don't think it can be easy to negotiate with it. But what I'd like to see from Mr. Lynch is him being really grown up and sort of rising above them a bit. I don't think Grant Shapps was impressive at at all. I agree. But the bottom line is, as a country now, we can't afford this. The government's got us into a mess. There's no more money in the kitty to be paying out more money. The public sector is very unproductive, yet it's very dominant in our economy. This is going nowhere. It's all going towards a bad place. And
OK. Peter, last word for you. Do you think the Labour government would be able to respond more positively than the Conservative government has to all of these continued strikes?
Yes, because Labour would get round the negotiating table with honest intentions, and the Conservatives have so far pursued a war for ideological and political gain against trade unions. And it was ever thus.
OK, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much. That was the editor of The Conservative Woman, a website you should check out by Cabby.
I'm not the editor, sorry, Conservative Woman.
And the former editor of The Labour List, Peter Edwards. Thank you both so much for being with me today. The Home Secretary is pushing for the biggest ever deal with France to tackle illegal migrants on the south coast. The agreement, which the UK hopes to finalise in the coming weeks, would see an increase in French officers patrolling beaches. About time. Meanwhile, official figures show that channel crossings have reached almost 40,000 this year, and our national reporter Paul Hawkins has been to the French coast to speak to some of those making the dangerous journey.
This is one of the many unofficial migrant camps on the outskirts of Dunkirk. We were told by humanitarian workers they tend to be segregated. Afghans living down the tracks, Albanians, a growing number, but seemingly elusive. This one, mostly Kurdish, and mostly young men escaping war or persecution in Iraq.
I am Dana from Iraq. I was 40 years old. I work in Baghdad, and Saddam took me in jail and take one kidney for me in left side. But nobody need to say, yeah, you are Dana, you are Lay. Everybody asked to me, you are not this person. This person is dead in Iraq. But I am not dead. I am here. And no, I come here to France 2 weeks. I try go with boat to England.
You tried 3 times on the boats, and what happened?
He take me in the beach where I go to in the boat. Okay. There I come back. I no go inside the boat.
But you're still going to try?
Of course.
Why the UK? Do you want to work in the UK?
I like work. Everybody like work on merit, on make children.
What kind of jobs can you do?
That's my job.
So that's your forklift driver's license from Germany?
Yes, I worked 2 years.
Okay.
I work very well.
Okay. And how many times will you keep trying on the boat?
I stay here, or I go dead here, or I go in UK.
Okay.
I no have choice.
A 15-minute drive, or if you're a migrant, 2-hour walk away are beaches like this. Plage du Petit. 2-hour walk from the camp where desperate people like Dana meet the people smugglers, but only during calm seas. Today wasn't that day.
This boat looks like it's been deliberately torn, ripped, and we know that the authorities in France try to destroy the boats if they find them by stabbing them and shredding them with a knife. So quite possibly this boat was going to be used to cross the channel, but the authorities have got here first.
Everyone here wants to get to the UK. Many have tried multiple times.
A lot of Albanian men are now going over on the boats. How do you feel about Albanian men being here? Because you're coming from Iraq, but Albania is a safe country.
Yes, I ask also for the Albanian why you coming, saying we no have work there.
And are they going to the UK to get involved in crime or to work?
For Albania, there is work is number one. What's thinking for?
The British people are scared of people coming over on boats. What would you say to them, to people who are scared?
I have to say for the people, I am sorry for this situation, but in ons land is problem mafia in my land. It's not a good government as England. British people have right. That's scary for the people going there because give too much criminal.
This Kurdish family of 8 were standing up because most of their tents were full of water. They told me they were 20 minutes from Dover when they had to turn back on their last attempt. Among them, 8-month-old Mila. Rats are everywhere here. Disease is common. Life, especially in winter, difficult. One migrant told me he'd rather stay here than be deported to Rwanda if the government gets its way. But others said anywhere is better than these camps. The UK, attractive because the language is easier. There are jobs and some have family there.
There's this weird symmetry that 82 years ago, during the evacuation of Dunkirk, a flotilla of small boats left this French coastline for Britain. It was a moment of hope for us that as allies we would regroup and then come back to liberate the French in Western Europe. It's weird that 82 years later there's another flotilla of small boats leaving the French coast for Britain, and for some in those boats it's a moment of hope for them.
And it's that hope that the criminal gangs are exploiting. In the meantime, the boats keep coming. Paul Hawkins, GB News.
Let's look at what you guys have been saying about the topics we've discussed today. On the debate in the Church of England on gay marriage, Keith says, in its desperate ongoing attempt to pander to liberal progressives, the church will only become less relevant. Absolutely, you cannot chase societal norms. Sheila on the migrant crisis says, processing these people would be quicker if they hadn't destroyed their identity documents. They can't have it both ways. Indeed, trying to have your cake and eat it. Steve on the Prime Minister says, so we can't expect the state to fix every problem, yet the state created every problem. Well, indeed, maybe we need a smaller state, eh? On COP, Kenneth goes, COP is a scam. It's all a pretense just to tax us higher and control the masses. China and the other big producing countries are laughing their socks off whilst our government is busy making us poorer. Well, I can't say it's a scam, but I agree with everything else you said. On extra bank holiday, an extra bank holiday has been announced for the King's coronation next May. The 8th of May will be a holiday for the coronation, which is on the 6th, and the King has also hosted a reception for world leaders ahead of the annual COP27 meeting in Egypt. Talks were focused on what more nations can do to combat the rising threat of climate change. But reports are suggesting that his brother, Prince Andrew, has left bereft and tearful when Charles, who was Prince of Wales at the time, told him he would never return to royal duties. King Charles is known for wanting to scale down the royal family. Now joining me to discuss this is former butler to King Charles III, Grant Harold. Grant, it's a pleasure to have you on. Thank you for joining us today. Do you agree with the creation of an additional bank holiday in May next year to celebrate the coronation?
Good afternoon, Calvin. Thank you for having me on. Well, see, the thing is, his mother, the late Queen Elizabeth II, there was a bank holiday for her coronation. So that's obviously why the government has said in line with his late mother's coronation, they're kind of doing the same thing. And it's a chance for families to celebrate together. So I think it's quite a nice, it's a nice idea. I think it's something that people will welcome, even those that maybe don't support the monarchy. It is a chance for people to get together with families on that occasion.
There's all together, a bit of unity we could do with some of that. How will Charles III's coronation differ from his mother's then?
Quite a bit from what we're hearing. I mean, obviously they're saying that the numbers are going to be slightly different. I believe there's over 8,000 attended his mother's coronation. They had to put in extra seating to accommodate this, where it's been said that the King's coronation will be a scale down. I think I saw in some reports it could even be as little as 2,000, which is still quite a large event. But for those of us that know Westminster Abbey, it's a big place. It's quite a place to kind of fill. And obviously this is reflecting budgets, because the late Queen's coronation cost many millions, where I think in today's climate, obviously they're aware of that, so they'll be doing everything to make sure that it's a coronation that's right for the times.
Well, indeed. I want to ask you, Grant, are you surprised that King Charles is still involved with all of this climate activism? Because there were some of us who said he would need to tone it down when he became king, and he kind of implied that he would.
He did imply, I think, a few years ago that he would, and that is what he's doing. It's very difficult for him. I do feel for him, because he's somebody that's very passionate about this country, about the people, about the way things, everything, right down to the environment. I mean, anyone that's actually been to Highgrove will be aware of how important the environment is to him. And I think not attending the summit is important, because like his mother, he's got to be neutral. This is part of our constitutional monarchy, is that he's there to advise and to listen. But he's not there to kind of get involved, and that is something that he has said he would do, and this is a very good example of him not getting involved. But he still had the reception. which is fantastic. It was held at Buckingham Palace, and that's his way of still being involved, but without being involved.
Indeed, but do you think he would argue that climate change is not a political issue anyway, and it means that he can continue to speak openly about it?
It is possible. It's very difficult to kind of say, but I think it is a fine line, isn't it, Calvin? Because when it comes to the environment and things, I think there's a lot of people who say that it's not really political, but it's just with the British royal family, they've got to be really careful with this kind of thing. So it's a difficult one for him. And who knows, as the years ahead, as a king, it'll be interesting to see how much he does get involved in things like this. But I think it's going to be difficult for him not to. But as I said, he's aware that this is how our monarchy works.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for your input there, Grant Harold, former butler to King Charles III. Now, if you've been watching for a few weeks, you know that I like to end on the collect for the week, and this week's the 21st Sunday after Trinity. Grant, we beseech thee, merciful Lord, to thy faithful people pardon and peace, that they may be cleansed from all their sins and serve thee with a quiet mind, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. You have been watching Calvin's Common Sense Crusade with me, the Reverend Calvin Robinson. I'll be back with you next Sunday at 2 p.m. Nana Okoye is up next. Before that, here's your weather forecast. Deus Vult.
Let's look then at this evening's weather, and the UK is looking blustery and showery as that rain continues to push in from the west. Let's home in on the detail. Starting off today in the southwest, and there'll be heavy showers through much of the evening, some thundery and blustery as well, clear spells though in between. Heading further east, and they're fairly dry, often clear skies to the end of the day, though a few passing showers possible later on. A blustery and showery evening for much of Wales, those showers feeding back in on the brisk southwesterly winds, which will also turn heavy and thundery at times. Some showers also likely across parts of the Midlands. Those should be less intense than further west, but some heavy ones are still possible, things turning drier throughout the night. And mostly dry for the northeast of England as well, with fewer showers reaching there. Some mist and fog patches, though, developing there. They could be dense. Clear skies, though, meaning it'll turn chilly overnight in the end. Plenty of showers across Scotland as well, those likely to be heavy around the central belt, but it will be drier towards the north and east. And a few showers likely for parts of Northern Ireland. Here it's going to turn dry, with clear spells for a time before rain arrives during the early hours of Monday. So the showers easing then for many overnight, with some dry weather before rain arrives from the west and the southwest later. And that's how this very mixed weather picture is shaping up into tomorrow morning.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio
and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Every Saturday at 2 o'clock, join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain. I'm not afraid to give you a platform and say it how it is.
Come on, make the case. Something like this is very, very important to people.
And we're always up for a laugh on this show.
God, honestly, you'd think there were no problems in the world.
Real Britain, every Saturday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust